Hey, welcome to tonight's study session, July 18th, and we have reason for an executive session.
Yes, as Matthew Munch, Assistant City Attorney, title of the executive session proposed for the evening is Executive Session for Discussion of a Personnel Matter, discussion of next steps in city manager recruitment pursuant to Westminster Municipal Code, Section 1-11-3C1, and Colorado Revised Statute, Section 246402-4F1.
Is there a motion in a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to go into executive session. I will go around the room and ask you to state your name and that you will keep things confidential that are said in here.
Bruce, Baker, yes, and I will.
Rich Seymour, yes and yes.
Lindsay Emmons, yes and yes.
Nancy McNally, yes.
Yes.
Sarah Nermella, yes.
Moby Azadi, yes.
Larry Dorr, yes.
Ms. Greg here?
Not yet. Well, this is the public session.
Oh.
And then we'll go into the executive session with Greg. So this is the public. So council will be back after their executive session.
And it's 6:30.
Okay, we're on. Welcome. It is July 18th and we are in study session. We just sort of are finishing up all of the details for next week, and just keep watching the website because our Deputy City Manager Dorr will make sure all of the correct times are going to be on that website so that you know when the citizens group meeting is going to be and the staff employee meetings with our candidates. And we will be interviewing Tuesday evening and Wednesday evening. So everything's except for the interviews will be live broadcast and on YouTube if you want to watch. So that's what we have to report with what we've been up to. And that takes care of number 3 too. So Councilor Baker, do you have any reports?
I went by the open space by Spanish Creek. It seems that the person who had upset the lady last night, I could not find them. I talked to a couple of bicyclists there and they say they come and go. So that was good news.
In regards to that too, I was down there on the path several weeks ago too, and there was some stuff there, but no person per se. So I was wondering if it was that same tree that was right down there off the underpass. So yeah, good. That's good to hear.
Councilor Seymour?
Let's see. Catching up from last week. I had a Parks Recreation Open Space and Library meeting. It was a great in-person. They had not had one for some time, and we had the opportunity to gather the entire group and outstanding group of residents working on grant programs. And just a little bit of a teaser on that, we will be getting a council packet on our information on the fact that the emerald ash borer is here. We have 69,000 ash trees in our city. 1,400 of those are on city ground, and staff is looking at those and identifying those. That is approximately 20-ish% of our entire tree cover. And John Bond has dealt with that in Illinois and seen entire cities decimated from that, where it was almost all ash trees. And it's one of those things too. There are treatments right now, and they talked about that. A single tree treatment by itself is $200, but and then you have to catch it before, at the right time too. And it's a triage effort from that standpoint. But obviously, if only 1,400 of those are on our property, city property, then the rest are in neighborhoods. And a great number of those are in some of our older neighborhoods because that was the tree of choice at that time too. So I won't go into any more than that because staff's preparing some information on that and we'll bring that to us. But Parks Rec Open Space is looking at that also in some of the grant money that they have and maybe addressing that into the future. So
I think you meant to say 6,900.
69,000 is what trees, I think. Well, we'll check with John because that's a lot of trees.
Well, if 1,400 is 20% of the ash trees.
Well,
There
no,
be
20% of our entire cover throughout the entire city is ash, not 1,400.
Yeah, but those are the ash trees on our property.
Right, 1,400. Yeah. Thank you.
Nothing from this past week. I just have the North Metro Arts Alliance coming up on Thursday, and it's been posted on our city Facebook page that they're looking for people to help paint mandola rocks for their fundraiser on Saturday, August 13th for the World Cultural Festival in Historic Westminster.
I attended the inclusivity board last Wednesday. They had a lot of questions around two different things that we've talked about as a group. I've spoke to them about. The first being they wanted to know about the CDBG process, and I know staff is getting information back to them. But I shared with them some of the different ideas that we had. Some of spurred off the fact that they had asked about expanding some of the water programs, so that they were, if you recall, the conversation was, how can we take those dollars and make it a longer impact versus a one-time help? So I shared with them that those were some of the things that staff were going to look at for us and come back with some ideas. I also talked to them about the idea we had as far as using some of those dollars that are allocated for the home fix program. I know it's not the right name. I don't remember what exactly it is, but potentially for people who are income qualified for like automobile repair to be able to find other ways to spend those dollars and help folks who need it. They sounded like they liked those ideas. The other thing that they had a lot of questions around was the DEI program and how that was going to be carried out. Did my best to explain to them your plan, that really it's about a cultural impact versus, you know, one-time impact. So then it's their concern is really around it not being a rubber stamp. And I feel like the approach that I've heard from you, Mr. Andrews, is exactly that you want it to be a cultural thing, and we're actually addressing things from a cultural aspect. The example that I used, and hopefully this is appropriate, was if you wanted a certain amount of female officers at a, like say a sergeant level or something like that, that you're actually giving them the proper path and support in order to get those roles versus we're just gonna, you know, put this many females in this many roles. That to me is more of a rubber stamp approach, and the opposite of what I've heard you say that you want to do. It's more of that cultural, making sure that there are no barriers between people and success in our organization. So hopefully that's the proper characterization that I gave them. They still really dug into that concept, so I don't know if that's something potentially maybe you have somebody come present to that board, being that that's the work that they do, because this is the second meeting they've brought it up, and I've kind of explained the same thing, so I'm not sure that they're taking it for what I'm explaining. So maybe an opportunity to explain to them, but that was the only meeting I had.
Councilor Newmiller?
Well, I did not have a meeting last week, but we do have Dr. Cog this coming week. I will just note, we have been getting a lot of good input on ideas for, you know, either policy or potentially budget ideas, or budget ideas that would impact budget choices. And so I just thinking it would be good to just maybe do a reminder post on some of our social media to remind people, hey, if you have ideas about how we should be allocating budget, go here, get them into this forum. So happy to share that too.
Or just remind people that they can reach out to council, because we're starting that budget process for citizen requests. They can do it
Yeah.
year long.
Yeah, I guess that was the question, is like, do we have to funnel them through a specific request channel, or if they just come emailed to us, do they, it all just get added in?
We'll take them any way they come.
Okay.
And then filter them.
Councilor Zani?
I had several meetings with different groups of residents, many from South Westminster, and it was heartbreaking. You know, there's still a food desert in South Westminster, and there's rent insecurity that's seems to be getting a lot more potent. It's always been bad. The rents are rising, and as we all know, we have a lack of housing that's affordable. And these residents were crying to me, you know, they're wondering what we're doing. And they gave me a lot to think about, but it was a solemn week, I'd say, talking with residents.
Metro Mayor's Caucus is raising dues, and I just got that today, so I will send that to Jody, to you. I can share it with the rest of council, but you'll need it for budget team. They're looking at raising it for 2023. And then from that point, I think there's so much cents per person that they charge people. And so they will keep going up until we hit 12 cents a person. And so it shows what I think we pay close to $9,000 or $10,000, and I think 3 years out we'll be paying $13,000. So that's all budget stuff, but I just wanted to make people aware of what they're proposing. Mayors and commissioners for US 36 quarter met, and I sent all of the things that I had been given pre-meeting, and nothing changed. We talked about the free fare for better air month of August, and they're not sure what we're going to do. They were thinking of getting the mayors to do a group something or other, but Mayor Castriana from Broomfield and she's never ridden a bus or the train. So I rode the bus for 10 years when I worked downtown. And so I said, maybe we do a video on how to do it, especially one of our biggest populations getting ready that would benefit from using either the bus or the train is our college students going down in August. And they have plenty of time. The whole family can go down and figure out the routes before they start classes. So I said, well, we could just do a little homemade video and show people how to do it because you've never done it. And I said, if you can do it, anybody can do it, right? So we thought we'd have fun. So I don't know what we'll do, but that's what we're thinking. And then I wasn't able to go to the first Civic Academy class. I had a migraine and was laying on the floor that day. So I went and talked to them on Wednesday, and a great group of people. So with that, 22 legislative session. City Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
And if you have a report, go ahead.
I do not tonight.
Sorry.
We'll keep moving right in. Thank you. Right into the agenda. I believe Mr. Chris Lindsay is going to lead us out. John's going to lead us out. Great.
Good evening. My name is John Pridgen. I'm the Policy and Budget Manager. And with me today, we have Chris and Teresa, who are also part of the legislative team. But the reason for the evening is Amy and Becky here today. So they're a part of our legislative effort in the city. So the city's legislative effort program has a lot of different arms. We belong to CML. Our staff belong to a lot of professional organizations. And all of those organizations have lobbying efforts. What Amy and Becky do differently is they are the only kind of direct voice for the city. So when we belong to CML or the Chiefs Association of Police, things like that, they lobby on behalf of all of their members. CML, same thing. Amy and Becky are really the city's only voice that represents the entire city. So I'm going to turn it over to them and let them kind of wrap up our legislative efforts session.
Great, thank you. So I'm Amy Atwood with Atwood Public Affairs, and it is a pleasure and an honor for us to represent the city of Westminster before the legislature. And Westminster has a fantastic reputation before the legislature and also has a very distinct voice. Just like John said, there are times that the city takes a different position, or another organization gets what they ask for and goes neutral, but that's not enough for the city. And so we continue to push, and we are also looked to by those organizations to help support when the city does support something, or we'll go into a couple examples, but we just want you to know it really is, it's a pleasure for us.
Thank you. And I'm Becky Long. I'm with Segal Long Public Affairs. And as Amy said, we just really enjoy getting to work with you all, getting to represent the issues that you bring forward in the building, and hopefully bring back more information to keep informing those decisions. And we'll get into some pieces tonight. If there's something we don't cover that you want us, to follow up on, please let us know. We're happy to do so. It's hard to synthesize all the things that happen in 120 days into a short presentation. So I'm sure we've missed something, but we welcome questions and feedback and anything else we can do to track follow-up information down for you all.
Okay, so after 2 years of challenges that COVID brought, It really was a relief to do the 120 days consecutively. No breaks. The legislature always meets for 120 days, but the last 2 years we've had breaks or it was cut short. So this year really felt relatively normal. There were 657 bills introduced this year, higher than the last couple of years, but right there as the normal of what we've been seeing in the past. We closely monitor, the City of Westminster closely monitored 140 of those bills. Closely monitoring means attending committee hearings, reviewing amendments to identify harmful pieces of legislation, and if need be, move to more actively engaging. We actively engaged on 54 of those bills. Active engagement means talking to legislators and working with stakeholders like CML and other municipalities, chambers, and lobbyists. Engaging staff for feedback and possible amendment language. Westminster is known as one of the stakeholders who will come forward with amendment language. And that is really credit to the staff. That staff really puts thought into it and comes back with thoughtful ideas. And it really sets Westminster apart. So if we look at major legislation this year, Westminster is arguably the most active member in local government space and policy community. We work well with others and don't struggle to push back when compromises are made that we don't agree with or we believe that it needs to go further. Point in case is the fentanyl bill. Only 3 organizations were still negotiating in the final hours on the last day, the last evening, and it was City of Westminster was the only municipality still negotiating. And then we had the Chiefs Association and we also had the DA's Association. We worked very closely with Chief Halbert and staff throughout the entire process on that bill. And we also made sure that we all had the same talking points. And so that when the chief was working through the Chiefs organization, we all were pushing on the same buttons. And he and I were texting and we were emailing, we were on the phone, and just to make sure we had that consistent voice. Although we didn't get everything that we wanted in that bill, Westminster's voice was heard, and not just by the Westminster delegation. That's also a key point. We don't just lobby those that represent Westminster, we lobby the entire legislature. And Becky and I were just upstairs talking about counting votes. And if someone doesn't commit, then we'll keep coming back until you do, or we'll send other people in, So another bill was a 48-hour bond bill. Again, we led efforts on this bill. Aurora and Colorado Springs engaged. CML moved to neutral very early on. Judge Langtine was the #1 leader in the Judges Association. He also wrote amendments that then Senator Gardner had drafted. And he was also at the forefront of the amendment that went in that stated counties are highly encouraged to work with municipalities, because nowhere did it say that they needed to work with us, and that was really important to the judge. These examples show how well we coordinate up and down with staff, with other groups, and Chief Halbert and the judge are really now well-known voices. They're known with legislators because we made sure to have them directly interact, be the conduit for those conversations. So not just through their own, like the judges organization and then that lobbyist, but really we're the ones that make the connections with those legislators. This past weekend, Senator Zenzinger had her town hall meeting. I believe a couple of you were there. And this is an example of how we work all year round. So Senator Zenzinger contacted us and asked us if we could coordinate with the chief and ask him if he was available and if he could be there. And so those are other types of activities we do. We stay in touch with legislators. We have to in those months that we're out of session so that we know what's going on. And seeing draft legislation is the best way to make changes. And so being on the forefront of that.
Before we move on off of public safety, I did want to touch on the fact that one of the items from the police action plan was to get more information to our command staff and our frontline supervisors on kind of what we do in the public safety space when it comes to legislation. And so what we were able to do, as Amy mentioned, those kind of talking points and making sure we're all on the same page, we're able to meet with our command staff on a regular basis to provide updates on the fentanyl bill, 48-hour bundle, and any other piece of legislation that came forward, and let them know what stance we were taking, how we were lobbying, so that they were able then to relay that information to the rest of the department.
Okay, so looking at other big pieces of legislation, like I had said, getting in on the drafting is important. And the collective bargaining bill is an example of that. We saw drafts in the fall that were leaked. We, through our sources, got those drafts, and municipalities were included in, and they were, we pushed back very hard. We worked our delegation, who in turn really did work the sponsors and said, this isn't going to work. This is a home rule. This is a local control issue. And in the end, municipalities were explicitly exempt from it. Counties didn't fare so well because they are political subdivisions of the state. So the bill, in the end, just impacted counties. The sponsors have made it clear that the bill will be coming back in 2023 to look at those that were exempted, which also included higher ed, was another group that was exempted, and special districts.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to jump in with a couple of the other things we worked on that maybe there were less news articles about than some of those, but are, as you all know, often really important to the city. Really based on direction and asks from staff, we spent some extra time digging in on some of the wildfire bills this year. There were a number of important bills, and we worked along with CML and other local government partners to make sure municipalities could access those dollars in many cases, as well as counties and other entities. So a couple notable ones that passed, just to kind of put on your radar, and I know staff will be tracking these too. House Bill 1007, it provides some private landowner tax credits, but it also provides a smaller chunk of money for some direct grants that the State Forest Service will issue. Some of those could go to local governments. They may go to like neighborhood associations, et cetera. Those are probably more directly in the wildland urban interface than some of where our infrastructure may live. But then there's also grants under House Bill 1011, where they allocated $10 million to the State Forest Service for grants also to local governments. And those may be things where the city has been partnering with watershed restoration outside of the city's boundaries. We might be able to come help chase some grant money. They require some local matching from the municipalities. Those will be coming due in March 2023 is when those grants will be sort of the guidelines and everything will be released. The prior one will be released in July 2023. So that's something we also track, is after we get those things in the bill, when can we go get the resources and try to keep an eye on those. Similarly, there was a water bill around turf replacement. This is not a huge program, but the state will have $2 million to grant out to local governments, HOAs, and others who have voluntary incentive-based programs for turf replacement. You do, again, have to match some dollars, but for those kinds of things, those are coming online. Those will also be online in July 2023. So the state agencies have to have some time to get the money in their coffers and transferred from the state treasurer, and then they've got to go ahead and start setting up those guidelines. And some of those bills were not effective until 90 days after the bill were signed. So a little bit of process on that side, but they're moving. I think the other big theme of this year, and a thing that really drove the session, was the ARPA dollars available this year. In total as a state, between state, local dollars, institutional dollars, so it's like higher ed, for example, or community health centers, Colorado received nearly $9.6 billion in ARPA funds over last year. And a lot of those monies are still making their way out into programs and community. The legislature allocated about 3.6 or 7 billion of those dollars. And we saw a number of task forces that started meeting last summer around affordable housing, behavioral health, economic development, that shaped where a lot of those dollars went. And then we saw a number of bills implement those things. So given their one-time money, a lot of those programs are shorter term, but there are some places where the state tried to make big investments. So one of the biggest was buying down the unemployment fund that we had borrowed against during the pandemic. That was $600 million. That helps the business community in a big way to not have to pay back into filling that one up. So that was it's kind of a love fest for spending $600 million. It's not always that way. But that one moved this last year. A lot of money into housing, transportation, capital construction, a number of other things, and we'll start to see those projects moving forward in coming months. The other thing that we saw was just that Colorado's economy continues to be stronger than we thought it might be 2 years ago. And so revenues have been higher than anticipated, combined with those federal cash infusion dollars. So we're going to see a bigger Tabor refund this year than expected. The legislature was assuming a refund that they were going to allocate to about $400 rebates to voters and taxpayers. And instead that's going to be $750 for single filers and $1,500 for joint. Those are anticipated to start going out in August or September, assuming a taxpayer filed by July 1. So if you start to hear questions about that, that's the general timeline. I know the state's starting to put more communications out on that as well, but it's getting a lot of reporting because everybody's like, give me my money. So it's coming out. Thought we might pivot next to sort of what we're seeing coming ahead in some of that space. And I think we'd be remiss to not start with the budget. Budgets are priority documents, as you all know. So that's where a lot of attention goes here in the state legislature. Again, general fund revenue is substantially higher than we have been forecasting back in March. And so the June forecast was pretty healthy. And the next question will be the September forecast. There's certainly a lot of uncertainty, especially at the national level. Inflation is high, international conflicts always drive uncertainty. And so, no one is spending all those dollars just yet, but they're thinking of ways to do so or how to not do so perhaps. So those larger than expected refunds will be part of that conversation. And then they anticipate that for general fund available for spending in the 23-24 fiscal year will be $218.8 million. So that's a lot of money, more than we have normally seen. So that's gonna, I think, be a big driver as we head into the legislative session, in addition to all the other issues I think we're all hearing about. Inflation being high, prices being high, housing being critical, all those things that we're gonna hear about through the election season will then roll into bills we'll see at the legislature next session. All the hits, all the classics. And so with that, we thought we'd touch a little bit about what's next in the election space.
And Westminster, the major issues will be back, whether it's public safety, local control, labor and employment, water, wildfire. It just is the approach. How do those bills look? So when we look at the election, it's no surprise, everyone knows that, or has read maybe, that the Senate is in play for control. The Democrats right now have 20 seats and the Republicans have 15. So there's a five seat margin there. There was redistricting, and so we have new boundary lines. With that, it looks like that there are 5 competitive seats, which means the Republicans have to hold all 15 and pick up 3 to change the balance of power in the Senate. Regardless of the election results, the Senate will tighten up. And the closer that margin is, it really does impact the approach of legislation. We have a number of what would be considered swing votes in the Senate going both directions, and it's very issue and topic specific. So you can't say it's just this legislator or just this legislator. But right now, things still are looking like those 5 seats are really competitive. The House margin is wider, with 41 Democrats and 24 Republicans. There are a number of competitive seats in the House as a result of redistricting. Depending on the political winds in November, the House could flip if it really is a windfall year for Republicans. But that margin will certainly tighten up as well. Do you want to talk about changes in leadership?
Yeah. Okay. Elections bring changes in leaderships, but so does term limits. And we've got all of that happening at play here in Colorado next year. As Amy said, we anticipate the House probably changes a bit, maybe tightens up. 41 is a really big majority. And so there's some, I think, estimates that would shift even if the Dems maintain control of the House. But the outgoing speaker and the outgoing majority leader are both term limited. So we will see a new race for leadership in the House if the Dems maintain control. Certainly if Republican leadership, it flips to Republican leadership, we'll see new members there as well. And with a new speaker and majority leader, that means potentially new committees or a change to existing committees, means new committee chairs and memberships and all of those things. So December will be a very action-packed month once the outcome of those elections are known and everyone is scrambling for what committee they want on. If you talk to candidates and you say, what committee do you think you want on? Most of them will say things like education. There are not 65 members on the State House Education Committee. So there's going to be some heartbreak and disappointment in December. And so a lot of what we're hearing right now for those safe seats is a lot of posturing for where people think they may be within their caucus headed into the next session. That could also be changes to the Joint Budget Committee membership and other key players sort of in the mix. On the state Senate side, if the Dems do maintain control, I think generally we think leadership is likely to stay as is, with Senate President Steve Fenberg and Majority Leader Dominic Moreno likely staying in leadership, but you never know. Sometimes things get strange. That said, they might still want to make some changes to committee leadership. Steve Fenberg came in as Leroy Garcia left in the middle of his Senate presidency term, so he wasn't going to change committees to fit what he felt like made more sense. Neither was Dominic Moreno, so they may do some thinking this summer and think about changing it. If Republicans win in the Senate, we're likely to see Paul Lundeen in leadership, and there's some questions about who his number 2 might be. And the real secret is that like the majority leader in the Senate is actually in some ways more powerful. So who's gunning for Senate majority leader is a big question these days. So there's lots coming on that front. We'll see lots of weird decisions between now and then as people try to position for those things, to try to make the cut for those House Education Committee seats, among others.
Councilor Seymour, you have a question?
I'll wait till the end.
Okay.
Yeah, we're almost done.
So in the meantime, between now and November, there are a number of interim committees that are meeting. I have to read this one because it's a tongue twister. The Simplify Sales Tax Task Force has already begun meeting. They met last week. Westminster has historically been very involved with that task force, feeling that it's a very local control issue on sales tax and how the city deals with that internally. It's an internal process for sales tax. Westminster was used as an example during the Department of Revenue presentation on Thursday morning as showing the complication of here is a city that then has 2 counties, and how does that look on the form, and the form's getting too long, and a lot of other problems. So that one has already met, but we do know we'll still see wildfire, water, transportation. Those interim committees will be meeting as well, and we track those interim committees closely because legislation comes out of those committees. They're given authority to draft bills, and often in those committees, a bill idea that doesn't get the committee approval will then still become a bill by a committee member. It just won't be a committee bill.
And as Amy said, those committees will start meeting. Most have a couple meetings here in July into August, September. Some of them are local to Denver. Others do field trips. So the Transportation Review Legislative Oversight Committee, full name, often does tours of things that are getting state funding. So they'll usually hit the road. The Water and Agricultural Committee will be in Steamboat for their first meeting. No, Denver Water for their first meeting, then at Steamboat, then back at the state capitol. So we try to keep tabs on the issues happening there. As Amy said, it's usually a good preview of some of the issues we will see ahead. So with that, we'd love any questions you all have.
Councilor Seymour?
Interim committees that answer my question. Thank you.
Look at that. We're here
could
for
feel
you.
it, yes.
Anyone else? I just hate the 27-cent delivery fee. I don't know who dreams these things up to ruin small business, but those little things are just a pain and no rationale.
That was actually what the conversation was about Westminster. Specifically, they were talking about that 27 cents and the difficulty for businesses because there's so many layers.
Yep. anything but small business friendly. Anyone else?
Just a general question, these committee meetings, are they open to the public?
Yep, they are. So the committee agendas are posted. We can forward a link for y'all to look at. They often do take public testimony. Sometimes for like the transportation ones, those are a little hard because it's like they're in a van going to like look at an overpass. So you kind of got to like drive around following the committee, but you're welcome to do that.
And we've done that.
Yeah, sometimes,
that's not
sometimes you
unusual.
spend a day that way.
Done it with Capital Construction Committee.
Now
toured the
that
state
Edby Hill has
behind the-
been term limited, you can keep up with the committee. The good representative from Alamosa used to get there ahead of schedule. But so yeah, we can send a link to those. They post the agendas and documents ahead of time. For ones that are in a sort of stationary location, they usually have a recording as well, and any presentations are posted online. So we'd be happy to send those along.
Great.
Looks like you did a great, I know, just in reading your report, I felt like I'd been there. So thank you for all your work. And Chief Hubbard, I know we tried to get rid of fentanyl, and the answer I got Saturday, I think those of us that sat there, and when the DA said to us, well, we've got people that are addicted and they need it. So I guess it's good to not have 4 grams so you don't kill 2,000 with the one, you can just kill 500. I guess they can be proud of that. I think it is horrid.
Along those notes, I find it, so whatever we can do to our delegation so that they hear from our people that actually do the job, including our chief. I was very troubled on Saturday to hear the comment made by one of the legislators that there's only so much they can do at the state level that really affects public safety, and it's really the local. And then to hear both our chief as well as the chief from Arvada with similar problems with staffing that really is driven by 217, and they seem completely oblivious to that fact of what that legislation has done to law enforcement in Colorado is super troubling. On top of the fentanyl, that they don't seem to understand that the addiction is not stopped when we don't give the ability to the courts to charge with felony, so that you stop somebody who's on a drug binge. And that's what's fueling the catalytic converters that they talked about they're doing stuff about. To me, a lot of what we heard was going after the problem, not the root cause, and it's troubling. So I hope going into this next session that they listen to more from the courts, what they need the ability to stop people, so that you give that really you're not doing that addict any justice, because they need time to stop, be connected to resources, and stop the stealing, because that's what's, that's why they're breaking into cars. That's why they're stealing cars. And I mean, we hear it from law enforcement. So the fact that they didn't seem to put 2 and 2 together at that town hall was very troubling to me. So for whatever it's worth, going into next session, I think that they need to hear that from our folks in our municipalities.
So a little bit on that front, traditionally, our legislative efforts tend to be more defensive when legislation comes out, then we get involved. We've had some discussions about the possibility of taking a more proactive approach and actually introducing legislation. Maybe the appropriate time to discuss that kind of sphere is when we bring back the policy statement and the protocols.
I appreciate that. I'll tell you from my perspective, and obviously I'm just one vote and I need 3 other people to back me. But I do know that the majority of this council has said that we want to look at ways to get tougher on crime in this city. And I hope that sends a clear message to the state that we're doing that because they're not doing their job. And we have to hold people accountable and stop some of this stuff. I think the days, in my opinion, if you want to turn the tides in Colorado, the days of we're just going to try to make this as not bad as possible, and we're going to play along in order to keep them from making worse legislation, that's not working. So I would prefer that stance, that we actually are being more proactive and saying, here are the problems that we see. Here's what, where the legislation, as good intentioned as it may have been over the last 2 years, this is the damage that it's done to our city as well as the Colorado region.
Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see y'all.
Thank you.
Like the gong that we're done.
Yes.
Final next one.
Yeah.
Don't hit anybody with that.
I don't
It's
think I'll
dangerous.
laugh. Yeah.
Deadly
I
weapon.
could use it.
Good night.
We'll take a 5-minute break while we switch over to get presentation of the 2021 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report.
Go straight to the.
Nobody.
Better,
Make him choke.
thank you, Mayor. Better for me to defer to the boss here at the table, but good evening, everyone. I'm Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy City Manager. Thank you. We will be presenting the 2021 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. We do have some copies hardbound. Here in the back, if you'd like to grab one, or any members of the public to take home, you have it in your packet. Of course, in this age and era, it is online, and paperless if you would like to view it that way. Let me introduce our guest tonight. On my left is Sherry Sanchez, the Accounting Division Manager, and next month, Sherry will be celebrating 27 years of service to Westminster. And so I wanted to mention that. And she and her team are responsible for the production of the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. And so I wanted Sherry to be here to take on any of your questions and receive thanks and kudos. And then also our guests from Forvis LLP CPAs are Marcy Ardan, their Managing Director, and Carmen Jeffries, their Director. Their company has been renamed. They've served our city for a number of years. They formerly, you may have recalled them as BKD, and they've merged with another firm, BHG, and together their new firm is one of the 10 largest in the United States. They have clients in all 50 states, and they have 5,400 professionals on their staff across the country. As a matter related to the public, this Mayor and Council, you have a guiding principle that is transparency and accountability. And I can't think of a better emblem of that than this Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, which has been audited by these independent CPAs. They understand their duty under City Charter 9.1, which is to perform a professional audit of the city's books and records. They'll describe the scope of that work and their findings here in a moment. And of course, they've performed this audit in compliance with Colorado statute, generally accepted auditing standards, and all of the regulations that CPAs and CPA firms are responsible for under the Colorado's Department of Local Affairs. So with that, you have also in your packet tonight the independent audit report from Forvis, and I think that Marcy, their Managing Director, will cover that now. And then staff has provided a 5-page report in addition to the 200-page ACFR. I'd like to speak a few highlights that I think would be beneficial to all here and the public. And then, of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions either here or later in writing for you to receive and accept. So with that, Ms. Ardan, would you present your report, please?
Thank you, Larry. It's good to see you all in person. I think we've done this virtually the last couple of years, so we're excited to be back in person. Going over our pieces of this, starting on page XI of the ACFR. I'm going to call it ACFR because I'm going to trip over annual comprehensive financial report. It's a tongue twister.
Mr. Baker, would you grab me a book?
Does everyone want one?
Yes, please.
Offer them up.
Those are hard to deal out though.
Shuffle. You found the shuffle?
Yeah.
Rich.
Which page did you say?
It's in the opinion.
Under the
It'll have our
financial
letterhead
section.
on it.
Financial section.
So it's not too far into the report, but our audit opinions, we issued unmodified opinions. So those are the top opinion you can get. That's the best, that's what you want to receive. Now, if you were to lay this opinion and take last year's report and lay it next to it, you'll see there's substantial changes in how the opinion is formatted. That was because we had changes in our auditing standards. So actually the opinion goes first, and then there's a whole bunch of other information. But ultimately it says the same thing. You have an unmodified clean opinion, best thing you can get. While we're in this document, I'll skip ahead to our other reports that are in the back in the compliance section. So in addition to the financial statements, we also look at your compliance of spending of federal expenditures or federal dollars. So those reports started back on page 167. You guys had 3.3 million of federal expenditures that were potentially subject to audit. We do a risk assessment, and so we had to test 2 major programs. And the programs we looked at this year were the CDBG fund and then the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Cluster. So that's your loan from Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority. I like the summary on page 172 because that's a one-stop shop of our audit results. And so we're pleased to report that you had no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls over financial reporting or compliance, and we had no compliance findings. So it was really a very clean audit from our perspective. And you'll notice there's the summary of prior year findings on page 174, and we're pleased to report the prior year finding has been deemed implemented or corrected. So management was quick to correct what we had reported last year. And so before I go to our actual governance report, are there any questions on our audit report?
Councilor Baker?
So we have an unmodified, which means you didn't make any exceptions, one would assume.
Yeah.
But what does qualified adverse mean?
Qualified means that we would have had something where we didn't agree or there was a material error. So if we qualify our opinion, it would mean that something is really, really wrong and couldn't be corrected.
Because in accounting, there are many judgment areas. And so if our judgment diverged from your judgment as auditors, that would be a qualified. And adverse is where you just disagreed. Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay, so you'll also find in your packet our audit letter to those charged with governance. This is a standard letter. We're required to provide it every single year. There are certain things that have to be in here. If there's nothing really for us to point out, you'll see that it says no matters are reportable. So I'm just going to hit some highlights in here. The first page talks about our scopes that Mr. Dorr already went through with government auditing standards and then the uniform guidance for the compliance. On page 2, there are, in preparing the ACFR, there's various judgments and accounting estimates, as you mentioned. These are the ones that are fairly significant, and those are the ones we look at and test. So we have reviewed all these estimates listed on page 2 of that letter. So you can see the list is pretty substantial. There were no significant unusual transactions this year. And just to point out, there's just differences in the financial statement disclosures, revenue recognition between the different bases of funds. It's just something important to know. And then there were some subsequent events that happened after year end for the bondholders to be aware of. In regards to audit adjustments, we had no adjustments that we said had to be made, which we would call proposed audit adjustments. So we had none. Everything was materially stated. We did have what we call a proposed audit adjustment not recorded. And that, in that instance, I know management provided a description to you in their 5-page summary, but really in that, it's looking at the accounts payable process, and that's what our past adjustment was related to. Management sets a scope of, we're going to look at all invoices subsequent to year end at 25,000. So there leaves a little bit of gap where there could be an aggregation risk of everything below 25,000. But when we aggregated everything potentially in that population, it was not material enough to require management to record it. So their internal controls are working. There's just a cost benefit that they've chosen to set that threshold, which is perfectly fine. It's pretty normal. It's pretty common throughout in our client base to see that a threshold is used. We had no disagreements with management. And on page 4, you'll see there, the Government Accounting Standards Board has been very busy and they do not seem to be slowing down at all. So there's a couple of standards that will be effective for this current year that are pretty significant in recording the leases. And so I know management is working on those, but we just like to call those out for your attention. And that is all we had from the audit perspective. Are there any questions?
I see no hands.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you, Ms. Ardan. Thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you, Ms. Jeffries, as well, in serving our community and transparently reviewing and holding these books accountable and making them available to the public. I just have a couple of comments. We've written a 5-page staff report to go with a 200-page comprehensive financial report, but I would like to just note for the record that just some substantial numbers, and these will all drive your policy choices in your upcoming budget activities. But first, it's worth noting last year sales and use tax increased 11.4% in our city, and general fund expenditures decreased 1.5%. I'd also add that the city retired debt on bonds, loans, notes, and other capital leases in the amount of $20.8 million. And then finally, we booked $33 million in capital additions. All 4 of those, I think, show a lot of strength in Westminster and some things to really support the idea of fiscal responsibility and financial sustainability for our city. I know when I read the annual comprehensive financial report, I look for, revenues exceeding, expectations, expenditures being favorable to expectations, and you start thinking of ways to serve the community, and you'd be tempted to do that here. But I'll tell you, our policy and budget department in your upcoming meetings on the 1st and on August 6th will present many elements that come from this annual comprehensive financial report that will give you choices to deliver services and facilities and capital to Westminster in your upcoming appropriations for the 2023 budget. So with that, I'll just close by saying that this annual comprehensive financial report, again, has been posted to the city's website. You've now been presented with it. We have filed it with the state of Colorado as required, and that this annual comprehensive financial report meets all statutory requirements and meets all of the requirements of the city code and the city charter. And there is, at this point, nothing further for the city council to receive or act upon, but staff can, of course, follow up with any questions, answers, and discussion. And then finally, our staff will be submitting this to the Government Finance Officers Association, and we expect to receive the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. If we do that for this report, it will be for the 38th consecutive year that we would receive that, which is a very distinguished honor. So with that, I'll just stop and answer any questions you might have for Sherry or I from the staff perspective. Thank you.
38 in a row. Fantastic.
37, one more to go to 38, but yes. And we recognize that you have quite a discussion of this community survey results, and rest assured, many of the numbers and available funds will be a part of your upcoming budget discussions. So thank you.
Well, first of all, I think this is reason to celebrate. I mean, my goodness gracious. We live in a time where government runs short of money and fails all the time, and our net position increased $50 million last year. That's a pretty fine accomplishment. And if you look over the last 10 years, the net position of the city has increased $500 million. That's wow, isn't it? Isn't that amazing? I'd also like to point out that for our water utility, because the Gulf loses money, So almost all the money is the water utility. We have in investments, $131 million.
If that's the number reported, then that would be correct, yes. Of course, these are funds held available for capital projects, accounts payable, et cetera. Upcoming capital that's anticipated to be built pay as you go.
Yeah, but all those projects are decided by the city council.
That's right.
And what order we do them in and who comes first and everything else. And then just for the general government activities, we have $158 million in investments. And I'm not talking about restricted investments. I'm talking about just the investments. And that gets me to a second thing. On the restricted investments, we put the restrictions on those funds, correct? There is no outside agency that restricts. So we've said, this money must be used for this.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So we're a very financially strong city. Tremendously. I think that's cause for celebration.
I haven't seen a smile on your face like that.
I'm waiting for the butt.
No, I
Very weird, very strange.
well,
We have options.
one must be cautious, but when one is in this excellent of a financial situation, that opens up so many choices and possibilities us to make. And one of them could be in a tax reduction or some kind of a tax rebate. So I'm very pleased about the report, really and truly. I don't think our really future is as dark as sometimes as it's painted. Thank you.
Councilor Miller?
On that note, it just also makes me think of looking at the past recession and how we fared and the potential for whatever is going to be happening with those with our current state of the market and inflation and potential recession. So that would be something, maybe you can wrap that into the budget conversation for us, you know, some comparisons or what we learned from the last recession. That'd be helpful.
Thank you so much. Gosh, I expected maybe 10 or 15 more minutes, so you guys were quick, but it was easy to read. I appreciate all the work that you gave for our background material. And because of the 3 long just pieces in the packet tonight, I got a beautiful project done last week because I was reading and just changing thread as I needed. Interim city manager got to see it last night, but anyway, thank you so much for your hard work, and 37 years is a pretty, what?
27.
Oh, I thought you said 37.
Oh,
37.
27 for Sherry, 37 annual reports. I beg your
For the
pardon.
annual
Yes,
reports.
yes.
That's 27 for Sherry too.
Thank you.
So thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Go out for a Dairy Queen or something.
It'll melt.
I've never worked for 38 years. So have some ice cream.
Ice cream syrup is good for anything.
That's right. There's some in the freezer.
Sherry's already.
Pushing it.
You had to do it.
Okay, community survey. Another great project.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Chris Lindsay is going to lead us tonight through work, and just turn it straight over to Chris. Just jump right in.
Thank you, Jody. Good evening, everyone. Assistant City Manager Chris Lindsay. I'm pleased to introduce the 2023 Community Survey. And I think as I start, I really want to thank Teresa Boko, who's been our project manager for our team on this. In addition to Teresa, we've got our communications team that's helped us throughout, and a host of folks throughout the city that have helped us work through this project. The 2023 community survey, the 2022 community survey is an incredible opportunity to receive community feedback as we monitor things like the quality of life in Westminster and the quality of the services that we provide. Certainly, this also provides a list or a lot of input into the budget development process as we move forward in the next couple of weeks. A couple of highlights I would like to add. There's a lot of information, a lot of attachments. We wanted to be transparent. We wanted to be transparent and provide you all and the public all the information that was provided to us by our consultants. So we've sought to narrow that down this evening, but we still have a number of slides to work through with you. The importance, satisfaction rating, and the investment priorities are something that are new for us. And I think we're really interested to hear your feedback and then again work those into our budget process. Something that I mentioned Councillor Seymour earlier, I was really impressed by and spent a lot of time downloading and working my way through where those GIS maps by census block group. There's really good information that's in there, but you got to dig way into those attachments. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ryan Murray. He's the Assistant Director of Community Research at ETC Institute, who's done this project for us. We have a number of slides. I would ask that you hold questions until the end and then maybe take a note or whatnot. And we will come back to those and make sure we answer everything, but that'll give Ryan a chance to get through all the information we have.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Thank you for having us here this evening. We're a pleasure. We're a new vendor for the city, so it's exciting to be here, although we have some other clients in the area. I guess verbal cues for next slide is how this works, yes. Correct? Next slide then. All right, for those of you who aren't familiar, even though I think I've spoken to everybody probably from a talking head and one of these screens here previously, we're really the national leader in market research for government organizations. The other vendor you'd hired is kind of our top competitor in the realm, so we're happy to have earned your business and we're happy to be here. But our work is primarily focused, if not in transit, for whom RTD is one of our clients, but it's governmental research, so market research for local government organizations across the country, whether that be municipalities or towns. It also includes counties and state governments or state DOTs and things like that as well. Next slide. The purpose of this survey, as well as most of our surveys, is really an objective assessment of satisfaction with the delivery of city services or key services that the city delivers. We also are able to compare your performance nationally and regionally with residents from other communities. We actually developed a comprehensive front range benchmark based on only communities found in the front range. That full benchmarking section of the report really goes through all of those communities there. There were also trends in the report, so comparing 2020 to 2018. But those are less apples to apples comparisons based on new vendor, new methodology type issues. So we've held those out, but the full trends are in your report. So if you're interested in how you've done year over year comparing NRC to ETC results, you can definitely find all of those results there. And the design of the survey, really the intent of the project beyond the objective assessment is really to design and develop priorities for improvement. So whether or not the city would have received phenomenally high satisfaction ratings or phenomenally low satisfaction ratings in all of the areas ranked, we still would have developed priorities for improvement or priorities in which we believe will address overall satisfaction with the key delivery services. Next slide. The methodology here is really a 7-page survey, first survey administered by the city. We did this by mail and online to random samples of households, but we really broke the sample up into 3 corridors, and that's based on your 3 school districts. And the aim was to collect 300 surveys from each, which we were able to accomplish. And as you can see on the screen there, we had over 1,000 completed surveys, which is really great considering the minimum goal of 300 from each. This overall sample of 1,006 surveys gives us a margin of error of about 3.1% of the 95% level of confidence. And what that means is basically 95 out of 100 times, if we're going to go out and get 1,006 surveys, we're going to get these same results plus or minus our margin of error of about 3%. So that is the primary methodology factors. And if we go to our next slide, we'll see this location of survey respondents. This is really a map showing us where all households are not technically located, but very close to their actual geographic location. And the reason that I say that is because we geolocate to the block level. So any deliverables to the cities don't contain any actual address information for that respondent. While there might be a lone ranger out there in some areas, you might be able to somewhat pinpoint where they are. It'd be very difficult to know for certain where any of these actual individuals lived. But as you can see here, this map is broken across, I believe, your 3 school districts. This has 300 completed surveys in each one of those boundaries, understanding some of those dots are going to overlay next to one another if those folks are on the same street or something like that. So if we could go to our next slide, we'll see the bottom line up front. This is my overall interpretation of the results. I think these are the main highlights. If we walk away with nothing else beyond this and the important satisfaction analysis, I'll have done my job, or at least feel very satisfied in that tonight. So 83% of your respondents citywide indicated that the city is an excellent or good place to live. Beyond that, 70% of respondents rated the city as an excellent, good place to raise children. Those are the 2 things that I look at first anytime I get a new set of data. It really tells me how the rest of the results should go and where I should see priorities or where I shouldn't. 70% of respondents also indicated that they're satisfied or very satisfied with the overall quality of life in the city. So those 3 top markers, those 3 things that I look at most importantly up front to tell me the overall satisfaction with the community are those 3 items, and you're performing exceptionally well. Beyond that, the benchmarking is where I head next. And the reason that I do that is I want to put your results to apples comparisons. I want to see comparatively how you're doing to really put your results in context. Because the front range average is new for me, I was really surprised to see that the city actually rated 16 points above the regional average and only 10 points above the US average for the overall quality of services. So when we're saying, hey, how did the city of Westminster do over the last couple of years? You're rating 16% over other communities in this front range region. You're rated 12 points above the front range and 18 points above the US average for the overall value received for the city tax dollars and fees. Now that's a whole nother aspect. That's a whole nother thing to ask about. So we might be satisfied with the way you're treating us, the delivery of services, but when you're talking about my money, we start to kind of scroll into another realm of satisfaction ratings, and you actually performed extremely well against our national average as well, where we've seen a decline of those types of ratings nationwide, kind of regardless of who you are. You haven't been safe from the tax dollars and fees. So performing significantly above both of those averages. If we go forward 2 slides, usually I'll present these, so I'll have kind of a pause point, and then I'll bring up my next slide here. So satisfaction with perceptions of the city. This is kind of that litmus test, that overall grade card that I look at first. Overall quality of life in the city and your neighborhood up there at the top. Just so we're all kind of on the same page, most of the charts and the graphs in the report and most in the presentation this evening are shaded blue, gray, and red. Anything in blue is going to be your positive, excellent, good, very satisfied, or satisfied ratings. Anything in gray is neutral. Anything in red is usually summed for the 1 and 2 ratings, dissatisfied and very, or poor and below average. That is typically what we're going to see. We sum those dissatisfied rankings because there are so few very dissatisfied rankings that you can't really even pinpoint what the rating is there. But the tabular data section of your report has all of those ratings, including the don't know responses. We just want to make sure we're looking at those folks who had an opinion. When we talk neutral ratings, those folks obviously told us they had an opinion, but that's really a passing grade. So when we talk about value received for tax dollars and fees, 1/3 of respondents are in the neutral rating. It's actually a really positive sign, meaning we have some ability to turn over some of those folks to that very satisfied or satisfied position. But most importantly, that's kind of a passing grade. For the most part, I may not have a really good idea of what my taxes and fees are maybe paying for, but generally the city deserves a passing grade for that. And that's how I would suggest everybody analyzes all of the neutral responses throughout the report. If we go to our next slide, we'll see the overall quality of satisfaction with the city services, or overall quality of life in the city, excuse me. This is portrayed as a map. As Chris or Mr. Lindsay alluded to earlier, I apologize. These are shaded by census block group, which is one of the really smallest levels of geographic data that we can really get. These are merged based on low levels of responses in some areas. But anything in blue or light blue is showing you general levels of satisfaction. Anything in yellow is averaging out to a neutral rating. Anything in orange or red are averaging out to those very dissatisfied or dissatisfied rankings. As you can see here, the city is really serving residents across the city really equitably. We do see some dissatisfaction or neutral shaded ratings down towards the south of the city, but for the vast majority of residents across all those census block groups, folks are feeling generally good about their overall quality of life in the city. If we go to our next slide, we'll actually see the overall quality of life in the city ratings. We didn't show all of these maps here, but I wanted to get you an idea of how folks believe the city is as a place to live and raise children. Those are some of the 2 most important factors. Those are great marketing messages. Hey, folks really think we have a great place to live, and also come raise your children here, please. As a place to work, retire, and visit, those things are kind of off my radar for the most part. We don't always have suburban communities like this where folks are working and living in the same community, nor are they expecting to retire here sometimes. So those ratings, I think we can have a little bit of a leeway there, especially as a place to visit for other communities as well. We'll go ahead and go to our next slide. We'll look at perceptions of safety and security in different situations. For the most part, we're seeing really strong ratings here. There are some larger unsafe ratings towards the bottom. Those were some add-on questions. I unfortunately don't have any anecdotal or any extra evidence for you for those particular ratings because we just don't get that specific on our surveys that frequently. But those are some definitely concerns of residents, especially auto theft and property crime theft down there at the bottom. Over 1/3, almost 4 out of 10 respondents kind of saying, hey, I feel unsafe or very unsafe when it comes to those particular situations. But if we go to our next slide, these questions were asked very far apart in our 7-page survey. We asked residents if they're heading in the right direction or if we think the city's heading in the right or wrong direction. We have about half of our respondents, given our margin of error, about half indicated the right direction, with about 1/5 or 1 out of 5 of every respondent saying the wrong direction. But we've got a large portion, 1 out of 3 respondents indicating, I just don't know. Which means that there's some communication gaps there, some areas of opportunity for the city, not that we're just gapping in communication, but opportunities to educate and respond to residents, especially based off the survey results here. If we go forward 2 slides again, we'll look at our major categories of city services. And what we'll see is the giant list of the litany, the big ticket items that the city provides to residents. I've highlighted the 5 items that are kind of the top priorities for improvement. Quality of police, fire, and ambulance service is kind of a misnomer. We'll get to this later on. It received exceptionally high ratings at 73% there, satisfied, very satisfied. But the thing is about that particular one, the reason that it's a top priority for improvement is because it is very important to your residents that you maintain that current level of service. So those folks are doing a phenomenal job. If you check out their ratings in question 10, you'll see almost all those ratings are pretty phenomenal. You get to our benchmarking, you can kind of examine comparatively how those folks are performing. But the thing that I want to make sure that council understands is that folks just think it's really important that we should continue to emphasize that service. It's not a quality issue for any of those up there at the top. When we get towards the bottom, we have enforcement of city codes and ordinances, efforts to make sure your community's prepared for emergencies. A lot of that can be related to communication. Code enforcement is a specifically tough issue where somebody might call to have their neighbor enforced upon. If they're not at a regulation, the caller is now dissatisfied. If they are and are regulated upon, now they're dissatisfied with that particular area as well. So we see a couple spikes of dissatisfaction in just a few of these areas. We can really talk through a lot of that, but it's really maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, flow of traffic on city streets, and then the enforcement of codes and ordinances is the standouts there. So if we move forward, another slide, I'll breeze through these maps. I just like to give everybody an opportunity to kind of get the consultant's opinion or perception on these maps. So this is our top priority for improvement, the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks in the city. This should help public works to a certain degree understand where there might be some higher problem areas. Now, these could just be more vocal residents or residents with stronger opinions in a couple of these orange zones, as you see out there to the east of the city. But for the most part, folks are kind of neutral to the slightly satisfied in those. If we go to our next slide, we'll see quality of police, fire, and ambulance services. The reason that I alluded to what I said earlier is because, as we can see here, they're performing very well citywide with just a few hints of neutral ratings there. If we go to our next slide, we'll see quality of water and sewer services, one of our other top priorities. For the most part, performing very well, but when we start to go further out west, that becomes a more protective service, a service that kind of can go either way with folks. But again, it's more of an emphasis on improvement or emphasis on current levels of standards versus a problem with the current level of service. If we go to our next one, it's efforts to ensure the community is prepared for emergencies. Likely a communications thing. I'm sure the city is well prepared. Steve, our chief, and fire chief are all well prepared for emergencies. But it seems like some extra communication to some of those areas of town, or if the city could definitely improve or at least begin to push some of those neutrals to satisfied and hopefully some of those light blue areas to dark blue. Our last map that I'll show you this evening is on the next slide, and we'll see the enforcement of city codes and ordinances. This is one of our top priorities for improvement. This is an area where we saw large swaths of neutral ratings across the board here. We also provided the city with maps by school district. Those are not quite as helpful because we're aggregating larger sums of respondents across different geographic areas. The census block group should give council staff and everybody here at the city a little bit more insight. We're also developing a dashboard for you all. It's about ready. I owe it to Teresa. The gentleman who runs that group was on vacation and then I was on vacation and there were just vacations going around. So it was like a sickness at work, but it's
a good
ready.
sickness.
Yeah.
Everybody needs that
Yeah.
life balance right now.
I want to review it before I deliver it to Teresa, but it's a really great open-ended kind of Power BI powered tool. They can go in and actually hover over these census block groups. So you can see kind of the actual percentage rating of satisfaction in that group with how many respondents are in that area. And it'll be a really helpful tool for staff and elected officials alike. We go forward 2 slides. I'll introduce you to our benchmarking. I wanted to take just a moment on this slide because this was just a unique situation where we've never, I can't say never because we've done it in the past, but very rarely do we create unique benchmarks for folks. So this is something that we wanted to do for the city of Westminster. We thought it was important based on your work with NRC. We were able to benchmark almost 60 questions, 58 questions compared to our benchmarking database. The US average that you'll see in the reports based on almost 10,000 respondents, or 9,500, I think is a problem. Yeah, 9,400 residents in the continental United States. The front range average is based on a survey that we administered between April and May of 2022 to about 800 people from 23 communities across the front range area. So that is really up-to-date information. Those are actual comparisons to all of those communities, as you can see down there. If we go to our next slide here, we'll see Westminster rated above the US average in 45 of the 58 areas assessed. That's about 80% of those overall benchmarks. And you rated about a quarter over the front range average, 76 or 44 of the 58 areas. And you rated significantly higher in 31 of the 58 areas that we were able to assess. If we go to our next slide, sorry, we'll see some of our benchmarking. I didn't want to kind of bore us with all of the benchmarking charts, but I wanted you to get a good idea. Significant differences are really those differences that supersede or outside of our margin of error. Value received for city tax dollars and fees on this one. Again, that exceptional rating, something we have not seen nationally or in the front range recently, as you can see by those ratings here. If we go to our next slide, we'll see quality of life in the city. Rating significantly above those averages is a place to live and raise children. Again, those 2 items that I look at first. Place to retire, place to visit, not so competitive with our front range, but closer to our US average. And if we go to our next slide, it's that litany of major city services again, where we see green arrows across the board nearly there. Quality of police, fire, and ambulance services performing extremely well, along with your libraries and parks. Water services performing very well for an organization like yours in this particular area of the United States. That's a difficult particular service. And kind of going along those lines again, it's emphasis on that service or continued levels of services versus an issue with the satisfaction with that service. Flow of traffic and enforcement of city codes and ordinances, a couple of our top priorities down at the bottom there. So the whole thing that we've been working up to is in 2 slides. So if I could skip forward 2 slides again, our importance or our priorities for investment, our important satisfaction analysis. So not only are we asking residents to indicate their level of satisfaction with various city services and different categories across the survey, we also want to understand which services are most important for the city to provide. When we did this 30 years ago, we were just asking satisfaction. We were telling folks to invest in those areas with low satisfaction. Turned out some of those areas aren't very important to folks. So cities weren't really seeing an investment increase in those services. So they were investing in services that receive low ratings. They weren't seeing satisfaction booms where they should. What we started to do was blend that with importance ratings. So as you see here, this is the sum of the top 3 choices. Those 5 items again are highlighted up at the top just to show you that those are our top priorities for improvement. And as I've been saying the entire evening, fire, police, ambulance protection, quality of water and sewer services, not a problem when it comes to satisfaction. It is a continuation of that current high level of service. If we go to our next slide, we'll see a breakdown of our overall categories of city services based on the important satisfaction analysis. Now this will look slightly different in the report that you've received. I like to provide a little bit of additional analysis to this by breaking out the high, medium, low and kind of shading it for everybody. The items at the top are going to have the biggest bang for the buck when it turns to our next survey and the increase in overall satisfaction with city services. Major investments in those areas are really difficult because those are some of our highest ticket items at the top of the list, especially maintenance of city streets and sidewalks. I heard your presentation earlier. I know there's a lot of extra cash. But we can't burn all of our money on streets and sidewalks because of a few years investment. So that's a difficult proposition. So those items towards the top are not only somewhat difficult items, but you're very lucky because 2 of those items received really good satisfaction, 3 and 4 on the total list of 13. they're just really important for us to continue to emphasize those levels of services. When we get towards the middle of the bottom there, flow of traffic and down, flow of traffic is one of those areas that could become a top priority in our next survey if we don't try to either communicate with or begin to help smooth out some of those irregularities. If you're doing construction, which you shouldn't have been over the time of administration, it was winter, that can be a cause for this. But if we had major construction projects over the summer and we do a survey again in the winter, folks are going to kind of remember that type of stuff. So kind of thinking to last summer, last fall, what were we doing on the streets? Were we causing flow issues? That could be kind of reminiscent here for residents. The items in green, we're performing a good level of service in terms of satisfaction, or it's not important for us. So we see quality of municipal court services at the bottom. Your average Westminster resident probably doesn't deal with your municipal court services. That's why it was 12th in satisfaction, although not really a problem. Most important, 1% of our 1,000 respondents indicated it was one of those most important items for the city to provide. So again, if we can kind of break this down, items in red, most important, should push overall satisfaction and satisfaction with those given categories. Flow of traffic on city streets could be a higher problem than it is right now in the future if we don't begin to communicate about that with residents. Those items in green are performing pretty well, no need for investments in those. If we go to our next slide, we'll see public safety services. We did this for different categories across the board. So if public safety services, which it was one of our top priorities for improvement, we can see what might help us in the long run increase satisfaction in that category. Efforts by police to prevent crime is at the top of this list. Well, what do we do to help prevent crime more? Well, you're probably already doing it. Now, I'm guessing if we ask Chief, I'm sure everybody's hard at work of preventing crime. What the average resident doesn't know is what are we doing? So communicating about that, making sure that folks understand what police chief has in mind, what the city is supporting him with, and how we're going about that can go a long way in bumping the satisfaction rating for efforts to prevent crime. Visibility of police in neighborhoods is the exact same situation. We can't all stand in front of our windows 24 hours a day to see when that police cruiser comes down my neighborhood, although I know that they probably do. It's just a difficult proposition. So some of these items at the tops of this list are really perception-based issues. So those are best combated with communication for the most part. So as we kind of get into that list, I've highlighted 4 areas that could potentially be higher priorities for improvement or jump into that 0.10 or above ranking there if we don't try to increase satisfaction or reduce importance by increased service levels. Those items in green are doing very well. If we go to our next one, we'll see Parks and Recreation. We had 2 high priorities for improvement in this particular category. Quality of walking and biking trails and paths, but you'll see here, it's another issue where satisfaction is high. It's important to residents that you continue to maintain that current level of satisfaction. That's what they're telling us. Same with maintenance of city parks. So while we do have high priority for improvements based on our analysis, it's a bit of a misnomer because you're performing exceptionally well in those areas, and you can see that based on your benchmarking. We go to our next one, we'll see code enforcement. For code enforcement, it's really about the cleanup of trash and debris on private property. All of those items received relatively elevated important satisfaction ratings all the way down to sign regulations. That's a very difficult particular section of the survey for any community, and that's why I kind of brought it up at the beginning. If we go to our next one, next slide, it'll be maintenance and appearance of the city. This is condition of major city streets, which goes right along with one of our top priorities for improvement. Snow removal, traffic flow, another priority, and accessibility of streets, sidewalks, and buildings for people with disabilities. Well, that one's a little bit kind of off the radar, in my professional opinion, just not seeing that a lot. It's not a question we ask in a lot of communities as well. So I think it's really progressive or great that we're at least trying to gauge and understand where we are with that particular service level. Condition of streets and neighborhoods and snow removal on major city streets are a couple areas that we'll want to focus on moving forward, just because they could shrink in satisfaction. And if they do that, we would expect the importance of those items to go up. If we look at our next slide, it's actually our last important satisfaction analysis slide. It's utilities and recycling. I don't necessarily go through all of these to pound all of these priorities into your head, but to give you the consultant's interpretation of some of these. And utilities and recycling is another short section like code enforcement was. We'll need to tweak the survey next time to probably ask for a limited number of items in the importance area, because as we can see, importance ratings are just a little bit elevated for only being 7 items on the list here. So number of recycling drop-off centers at city facilities, I know that those are somewhat limited within the city, so that should make sense to everybody. Quality of drinking water, taste of tap water, not that their problem area satisfaction is high, they're just really important that we continue to do what we're doing there. quality of recycling drop-off centers, and quality of utility billing meter reading. I'll tell you, anytime we ask about billing or fees or pay, folks are usually dissatisfied. So at 60%, we're doing pretty well in that particular area. So all of the 2 areas at the bottom did very well. I want to bring us to our next section. So if we skip forward 2 slides, we'll see communication and customer service. We asked respondents if they used the city's website in the last 12 months. About 2 out of 3 indicated that they had. If we go to our next slide, we'll see the satisfaction with the city's website, appearance, current and relevancy of information, and online services offered are really our top winners there. But for the most part, we didn't see a lot of dissatisfaction except for the ease of navigation or search function. I've done focus groups and other studies related to website design. You're never going to win with anybody. So 1 out of 5 dissatisfaction on that, I think, is perfectly fine, considering this is based on the 61% who had visited. This is not all city residents. This is just those who indicated they visited the website in the last year. If we go to our next slide, we'll see how residents have contacted the city in the past month. We'll see that there's a little bit of an overstatement on the city's website when we talk about, have you contacted the city, or have you used the city's website and then contacted the city's website? 42% indicated they've never contacted us. It's just similar to those who've used the website. So I think folks are likely going to that website in lieu of picking up the phone, emailing you, coming here in person, and things like that. If we go to our next slide, I really want to commend your front-facing staff. These are difficult ratings to receive here. If you notice, all of the ratings here are almost 60% and above, or actually they are all 60% above, which is just phenomenal. Similar to code enforcement, residents will call your city staff, and it will be maybe a woman at the front desk whom I spoke with earlier, and she's trying to answer maybe complex questions, or maybe questions about state highways or county roads, or municipal services that aren't that of the city of Westminster. That's a really difficult thing to do, because if you've gotten a phone call, somebody's complaining about something, you say, sorry, that's not my business. Here's a phone number. Well, you've likely left that person in dissatisfaction, if you'd have to imagine, if they took an exit survey right after that. But if you see these low levels of dissatisfaction across the board, high levels of very satisfied and satisfied responses, you should really be commending every single forward-facing employee at the city, because these ratings are really difficult to receive, even just the way you're treated by city employees. Because you might catch a utilities guy on a bad day, or maybe he's covered in something he doesn't want to be covered in out in the field, and you approach him and he's not kind. Well, we've all had our bad days, but you don't seem to be having a lot of these issues here. So that's just, these are phenomenal ratings. I want to make sure we slip those in here. If we go next, we'll talk about the sources of information that respondents used to obtain or receive information about the city of Westminster. 71% indicated they used the city's website. That is funny, because in question 4, we asked, have you used it? Only 61% indicated yes. So sometimes this happens with voter. Are you registered to vote, or did you vote? 99% of the survey respondents voted last time. Well, I apologize, but that just is incorrect. For the most part, folks are going to your website, though. I think that trend holds true based on the 61% that we saw earlier. Parks and Recreation Activities Guide, I'm guessing that's mailed out to respondents or to residents. That is something that you should continue to doing, even if mailing and postage rates go up. Parks and Rec is about half of my work compared to city work. Parks and Rec organizations get slammed when they stop mailing that thing out. I know it's expensive and it's cumbersome, and residents don't always read it, but as you can see here, 7 out of 10 residents think that they read it, which is really important. But respondents overstate their usage of the website. Overall, I think communication or sources used here is actually really good, and we only have 46% of residents indicating word of mouth, which means that they're actually going to sources run by the city, as we see Westy Connection, Parks and Recreation, city's website at the top. At least they're coming to us for their information. When we go to our next slide, we'll see question 26, where we've kind of added that importance question along with our which ones are you using. And so if we go to our next slide. There we go. We'll see that most residents are going to prefer the city's website, along with the Parks and Recreation Activity Guide and your emails, which actually wasn't a part of the top 4 in the previous slide. So most folks indicate, I want the information to come from the city. I am getting, about half of residents indicated I am currently getting information via word of mouth, but fewer than 1 out of 5 indicated that's a preferred method. So there is some gap, and there are potentially some gaps that the city can easily fill in terms of more and more communication, either going to social media, which is preferred by about 1/4 of our folks, Westy Connection, or the emails that could be more frequent and less kind of engaging and more just kind of, did you know, or for your information versus kind of an engaging type of email. But using those sources that we have at our disposal at the top of the list here can go a long way in helping us combat some of those perception related problems that we saw throughout the survey. We can go to our second to last slide here. We'll see the social media sources that are most used. Facebook is what I've been telling everybody for about the last 3 years. That's where you should really be investing all of your social media communication in. Fewer and fewer respondents are actually probably visiting your YouTube unless folks are live streaming a meeting like this. They're not going to YouTube to get information necessarily about the city on an off day or at midnight or something like that. They're likely going to go to Facebook. Nextdoor is a great opportunity as well, where we've had other clients basically have city liaisons across neighborhoods across the city, all kind of report to the city, have a person here that they're kind of reporting to, but then they go out and they're all on their own Nextdoor groups or Nextdoor neighborhood groups across the city, and they can really provide up-to-date information. Here are the minutes from last night. There's a meeting at 6:30 tonight. Please be there, and that sort of thing. And that can really push along actually concrete city sponsored information to residents on a site that is kind of difficult for cities across the country. But if we can get those liaisons kind of implanted into that site, make sure that they're known liaisons with the city, but not city staff, you can go a long way with pushing information on Nextdoor. And that's one of the most, or one of the 3 most used social media sites that you have up here. I know Instagram, you can post to Facebook and Instagram. I don't know how that works for more informational posts, but then LinkedIn comes in there about 26%. So if we go to our next slide, I just want to summarize. After a discussion with Mr. Lindsay and Teresa, while the trends are suggesting that there's some areas for improvement, we won't really know until ETC Institute conducts a second survey. And the reason is that we just have a slightly different methodology. Your previous vendor just would go out and get the number of surveys that they could get and then kind of pack it up. And our methodology is really to hit goals. So we aim for goals and we make sure to kind of combat the non-response bias to reach those goals. And that's really important for us. We feel like our results maybe are just they're just different for this particular exercise. So comparisons, while maybe lower in previous years, I think that you really need a second survey done with our methodology before you can make a lot of those assumptions. But the city of Westminster truly is setting the standard for the front range for so many areas across the board. If you get into the benchmarking of the report, you'll see a lot of that. You should begin to focus on those important satisfaction areas that are of most importance, and also lower satisfaction as identified by residents. And you should plan to conduct another survey in 2 years to kind of gauge that. Now, the important satisfaction analysis is a great tool, but it's not the end all be all. We have public works directors and parks and rec directors who are on the ground and know things. We should rely on their expertise first, but using the city survey is definitely a guide as to where should we be investing. Where should we invest more or less, or how should we invest? And sometimes that communication piece can go a long way in telling us we don't need to invest actually in that service, but in the communication of that service. And that can be a lot more fiscally responsible decision than maybe investing in a service that isn't really going to give us anything back. Your water services are a perfect example. If we continue to invest more in those services, we're likely to see the same satisfaction results. Just folks might think that it's less important because they know that it's more steady. But if we begin to focus on code enforcement and maybe send out a postcard in those problem times, talking with our codes folks, we can actually boost the satisfaction with code enforcement because now folks are self-enforcing. Or if we get out there on our communication channels that we know are most successful, we can inform folks what we're doing to prevent crime and then see the return of the survey in 2 years. So with that, I think I have a questions slide, but I'm here in person, so I'll take any questions, and anything I can't answer, I'll just take home with me and make sure that we draft up and move on to the staff here.
Thank you for the presentation. I had one quick question, then a couple things I want to point out to the room. On the code enforcement slide, I was surprised, and it was slide 14, how low code enforcement was. I'm just curious how much of a chance there is that people are mixing problems that they think maybe are police problems versus code enforcement, understanding that we get a fair amount of things thrown at us as council people that are actual code enforcement questions versus potentially police. I'm just curious if that's like a
Very likely
misunderstanding.
Yep. And the reason that I brought up postcards is that the city of Olathe is one of our most successful clients. They do quarterly surveys, though, so totally different kind of realm of data analytics going on at the city. What they've started doing is sending out quarterly code enforcement postcards. It's a friendly reminder. It's disguised as a friendly reminder, but basically folks are now enforcing upon themselves. So now they know the regulations, they know what is and isn't code enforcement, but during the summer months or preceding those summer months, they know not to park their boat on the street. They know that they have to sweep the sidewalk of snow in the winter. And in the summer, they know that they have to keep their lawns mowed. And so by informing them, that can go a long way. But yes, we're likely seeing some misunderstanding of what those code enforcement errors might be.
Thank you. So the couple of things I wanted to point out to everybody, because this is usually what I look at. And it wasn't in the presentation and not a big deal, but to me, this is why I think that we need to really prioritize some of the things I brought up, such as getting serious about crime. If you look at crime from 2018, it was listed as moderate to major at 52%. In 2020's survey, it was at 57%, and this is at 72%. A huge increase of what people consider that a problem. You see some of the same trends in homelessness that went from 37% 6 years ago, or that's 4 years ago to 2 years ago at 46 to 62% for homelessness is a problem. And we're seeing those on the things that we've been focused on as a council, and I think it's just telling. And you see some of the same thing as far as police services. And this was one of the benchmarks that I was concerned with our last survey. Understanding there are forces outside of our control that we're also dealing with, but I think it's important for us to look at this and say, yeah, our community still says this is important. They still love our police and fire, but they also see, what we see as far as those are challenge areas for us. So yeah, I want to celebrate our people, but I also don't want to miss that there's a reason that we put those in our priorities. And I think that if you look at the benchmarking comparisons, that rings true in this survey.
Councilor Mel?
So I'm kind of annoyed by this report out. It's focused on some things, but not some of the things that really did arise. And for instance, I'm looking through, I don't see even a slide on question 23, which is what are major problems in the community? Over 70% of our community members said that the high cost of housing was a problem. I didn't see that shown here. And when it comes to, and then there's over 60%, almost 60% say that they don't have good access to affordable housing. Where's that? Why is that not? That's those are just as a significant issue in our community as other pieces like code enforcement. So I know there's some things that we have more ability to control, like code enforcement or how our police are doing, but that should be reported because those are things that we should be hearing and responding to. I was sitting here flipping through because I didn't have time over the weekend to just dive into your cross-tabulated data, which one of the ones that was more interesting, one of the groupings that was more interesting to me was for the household income. And you can see some really significant differences in household income, kind of like how this graphic showing the geography of overall quality of life is not so great in the southern portion of the community. And that also correlates to our household income as well. And there's, for that cohort in our community, in that demographic, there's a much greater dissatisfaction in quality of life, their overall community surroundings, how safe they feel, their access to health and mental health. These kinds of things, now I know you were going to go with you're summarizing, but these are some key issues that to me, shouldn't really be looked over as we're trying to pull this information out and actually respond to it.
We could definitely have a work session on this, like a full day, but that's usually unreasonable for you all. to
Well-
sit down for a full day. So I do my best. I think we do our best as consultants to give you the high level aggregate results. And yes, the crosstabs highlight pockets of discrepancies. You still, I think, should focus more on aggregate versus, hey, this one crosstab said there might be.
But it's a
95%
big
overlap.
issue for a good amount of our
Oh, yeah.
population and for a very specific geography. And so I would rely more on staff to bring that up. So I don't necessarily rely on a market analyst to be thinking about policy issues and demographic and social issues. But these are things that our staff should be responding to. And then the other thing that I think would be helpful is for, when we have open-ended questions, my biggest pet peeve is when we don't actually consolidate that into some key takeaways and major issues that are coming from that. So for next time, instead of us having to read through line by line by line, it doesn't take that long, and there are actually computer programs that you can utilize to consolidate all that. So, it's good that we have, I guess I jumped a little bit more into the negative here, but it was just a big miss for me. But yeah, thank you.
Councilor Emmons?
I'm gonna piggyback off of what Councilor Normella said, but you all know me for the last 2 years, so I like to read line by line. I think it's important. And so while Councilor Seymour and maybe Councilor Normella would like the abbreviated version, I like to go through all of the comments, the unabbreviated comments, just because I found it interesting to your point that it was a key takeaway, the affordable housing, but there was also comments in there that contradicted itself, in that people wanted affordable housing, but they didn't want growth. So it's like, how do you balance that? Like, how do you read that in just a context of a report that says there's dissatisfaction, but much to what we need to accomplish here is, how do you then balance that? Because it does take some kind of growth to balance the housing and the market with that. So I think contextually, what you provided in the report is good. Yes, it's a lot, 1,400 pages, but I think we could really just learn a lot from the full context of the details on what we're going through in this report. So while I understand your report, or while I understand your thought, Councilor Normella, I think what you provided is good. And I think overall, I'm actually somewhat pleased. I'm not pleased with the satisfaction in some areas. What I'm pleased with is that to me, what I took away from this is that we hit our mark on our strategic plan, because a lot of it focuses on the items that need to be focused on, which is our core services, the streets, the police, the fire. So to me, that means that, in a year and 6 months from now, when we do this again, it's going to be important to have those benchmarks to see just where we need to move the needle on our strategic plan.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I just wanted to add, and I do think, Councilor Normella, it's a problem with affordability. I think that's another area where you're probably seeing some crossover in general affordability of living in the world, period. But if you look at what it was year to year, that mark, even though it's in a 74%, it only increased 1% versus the 2 years prior, where those other ones had multiple percentage point increases. So still something that we should try to digest and focus on, but the growth in that problem area from survey to survey wasn't a large discrepancy.
Councilor Normella?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's just missing from our overall strategic plan. And I know I'm not going to bring that up again too much. But I just thought I'd highlight it here, because there is that disconnect of what we're trying to do, and then like 70% of our residents are suffering from not affordable housing. And the only other thing I would say is I do appreciate reading line by line. It's just that as an industry standard for going through surveys, through public outreach, that is something that I would expect to have some key takeaways and issues. So, thank you.
Just want to, so Councilor Mello, I think you nailed many of my questions already. The quality of life for me, this question 3, this 1 page on it. And I know there's more in the supplemental. I think the as a place questions, as a place to live, as a place to raise children, it's very ambiguous what that could mean. It's not granular enough. I know it goes into, so the affordability piece is also my main gripe. Is that the word? Gripe with this. I think I would love to see a lot more granularity and a lot more specificity on geographic inequity, right? So this map shows it a little bit, but it doesn't dive into it anywhere else in this report, the geographic inequities, because there is one. And I think when I think about these surveys, I do see it from an aggregate standpoint, because the people elect 7 of us to represent them. And for me, I don't even think it's that, but I think it's us. It's the electeds. We all have a much closer pulse of what the people need and when and how. And we shouldn't depend solely on a survey to do it, because those pulses change over time. So I see the responsibility more on us to get out there a lot more. So I'm actually fine with the aggregate view, and the details behind it is fine. I just want more specificity that highlights the inequities, because Westminster, not everyone, lots of people know that Westminster is a great place to live, and residents feel that. It's when we get down to the specific questions of, well, then what's wrong? What's wrong with your life? What's happening? That's when, but that's, that to me is both could be handled in the survey with more data points, but is the responsibility of us as electeds to make sure we get out there. And to follow up on that, from reading this, it sounds very rosy, right? The summary or the feeling of this report is like, yeah, it's a great city to live. I think that's true for lots of people, but not for everyone. Because I do talk to people a lot, and they tell me a lot. And these are not people that I know. These are strangers who reach out to me. And they tell me they have a lot of issues with the affordability of rent. I mean, there's housing, but just rent increases are going through the roof. We have food shortages. And there are income disparities. So most of Westminster is middle class, upper middle class. But the lower income folks, we have an 8%, I think it's 8 point something percent poverty rate, right? If you look at where that is spread geographically, that's all down here. That's South Westminster. So I would love more of a deeper dive on South Westminster, knowing that the rest of the city, yes, we can invest in more core services, and we will via the strategic plan. But there are thousands and thousands of residents who cannot live, who are struggling to survive. And I don't want the perception of this, if people are watching, to be like, oh yeah, so Westminster is great, let's move on. No, we need to do better for the people who have less. And I think that takes a little more time and attention. So that's what I had to say.
Councilor Baker?
I'll ask the question to this group. Was there anything in this survey that you were greatly surprised at? Because none didn't surprise me. I mean, maybe I have a confirmation bias and seeing stuff what I want to see in stuff, but absolutely nothing surprised me here. Of course, I'll bitch about the $40,000 we spent, because
I will say I'm surprised that of the number of people that responded. That's the highest number that I've seen in a while. So for
I was
response,
thinking more in terms of
The
parts of our
answers.
city. You know, like I looked at the enforcement of city code and ordinances, and I can't help but look at that and say, well, isn't that significantly HOAs are doing our code enforcement? Because basically 2/3 of the city is HOAs, and they're the west and north arms. So the HOAs are basically enforcing the codes for us. So that was no surprise, and the dissatisfaction was no surprise. And I was a pharmacist for a long, long time, and people would ask me, should I take a test? A medical test. And I say, well, are you going to do anything with the results? And a lot of people don't. If we're going to get a survey and nothing surprises us, we're not going to do anything with the results. And to my colleagues who want to mitigate economic inequities, that's not the city's job. Not in my view. The city's job is fire, police, and water, and code enforcement, and building permits, consumer safety items like that. So we can't do anything about that. That's not our mission. That's not the function of a city. So we can all worry about the inequities that places in our society, because it does. But we have very few avenues in which to approach that. Thank you.
Councilor Seymour?
Thank you. I'll address Councilor Baker's question first. I was not surprised because I think our city should be ranked as it is. We deliver great services. We have quality people. We have, and right now we have less people doing more, and I think we should continue to recognize that. I think this is great because the way this survey was set up by utilizing the school districts, that gave us a better geographic spread than we normally do, and the fact that the response level that we got was outstanding. So we appreciate that. I would spend this much money every year, personally, because if you don't get constant feedback, and in this case, too randomized, but then also because I did read every single line of every one of the open comments on both this survey and the other survey. I'd like to have it in a format where I could do keyword searches and then do my own tabulation that way as well. But, you know, those things to me, and that's what I pushed out on social media, is please comment. You use that open box. And it, you know, some of those things, I have confirmation bias on that too, because I'd scan down and pick out those parts as well. But some of those, you know, I'd like to echo what Councilor Emmons said, is we in our strategic plan hit the high points of what, you know, what we can work on. And it's one of those things as well as in business, you can decide to, okay, do I take my weaknesses and work on those, or should I magnify our strengths? And our residents told us what our strengths are, and I think we can continue to magnify those. But, you know, the open comments also told us some areas too that our residents are the words that came up over and over. And here again, recognizing confirmation bias, our homeless issue, density issues, and public safety. There was quite a few comments on there about water rates, keeping in mind when this survey was taken too, and many of our residents had not seen the rates kicked in at that point. I think if we would have taken this place in time, there were some comments on it for people who, you know, look ahead. But I think the feedback, constant feedback, is important. And I do appreciate what you brought up as far as Olathe, Kansas, I'm assuming, because we all think Olathe, Colorado, and we're waiting for sweet corn, and we're just, you know, waiting. And so, you know, that's a great way, you know, a great idea that we can see from some other partners that utilize the same thing. But how can we take those things and make it so it's a positive rather than a negative too? So I think sometimes we on council, we don't get a lot of people emailing us or calling us and say, hey, that was great. But this is 1,000 households in our city randomly selected that I think overall it's not too bad here. So I think we live in a pretty good city. Now we as council have to figure out how in those margins we can make things better and use those geographic indications that we haven't had in the past to try to balance that out too. So that's my thoughts.
I wanted to address Councilor Baker's questions too. No, I'm not surprised. And again, like I said earlier, I think it validates our plan. However, I do agree with Councilor Seymour as far as seeing this more often is good. And the reason it's good is because, and I point out the areas where we're slipping, not to call out the great work that the staff who is, as Councilor Seymour said, and he points out a good point, we have less people doing the jobs right now. But those are the areas that I want to make sure that we stay ahead of so that we can stop those slides in satisfaction in those areas that are core services. To address some of the other things that I've heard from other council members, and you kind of made this point, Councilor Baker, those are our core services. That's the function of this government. We cannot be all things to all people, or we will just fail at all things. So I've always been a big proponent of making sure that we're focused on the core services that a municipal government is supposed to deliver. And I'll harp on those as long as I am able to have the honor of sitting in one of these seats, because those are the things that we're supposed to be keeping stead of. So I'm pleased with this in the fact, like Councilor Emmons said, this validates our strategic plan and the things that we're going after. And as far as those bigger economic things, and I think again, the cost of living is talking about a bigger national problem that we have. So there's elections coming up if you really want to focus on those things, both nationally and at the state, because obviously the country's in a bad direction. But I'm glad to see that this council is in the right direction as far as the things we need to put our eye on.
You just want to address, while yes, we do provide core services, we are also allotted federal money to distribute to address inequities within our community, like our CDBG funds. There are federal funds that are distributed by the state to assist with affordable housing. So those are areas where we can connect our residents to greater economic fortitude and opportunity. And it really only, it does not take that much effort as a community, as a city, to make those connections between developers and money and our residents. So with respect to the food desert that we have, I think that's something through our economic development function that we can be working on to help create more access to amenities and services down in the portion of our community that, the market right now, are the larger capital function of retail, and this sort of left people behind based on where they make money. We can connect businesses and people to the needs that they require. And so it's not, I view that as a core function of a community and of a city. And so, we definitely do have some differences in how we view what a city's responsibility is to its residents, but my point.
And I don't think we need to be all things to all people. I think we could be some things to some people. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we can address the inequities and the core services at the same time. I think, to Councilor Nemella's point, we have state and federal funds specifically for improving the quality of life of our residents outside of our core services, because it's important, and because our residents who elect us expect us to at least talk about it and look into it. I don't think it's absurd. I think cities across Colorado, and I can give you lists and lists and lists of cities and the projects that they're doing across the state who are doing this, who can do both things, who have great core services and are addressing serious issues that their residents are facing. It's not an absurd concept. It's happening across the state. It's happening across the country. And they elect us to at least ask them and talk to them and understand what they're going through, to see what we can do. Can we connect them to these other sources? Do we have sources within our coffers, which we do, to actually address some of the issues? A food desert is not the responsibility of the federal government. A food desert means we've chosen in our city's history to neglect a geographic area for a supermarket. We've had choices. It's not all market driven. We've had choices, and you all know that. You've all talked with people in South Westminster. You know what I'm talking about. So it's disingenuous to say, oh, well, this is just our city's only responsibilities and that's it.
Councilor Baker?
This discussion is really getting good, but it's not about the survey. So this is the kind of discussion I really want to have, not only on this issue, but a lot of other issues. Okay. And I got to say something about the food desert. We've done 2 failed URAs in South Westminster to try to bring in grocery stores. Both failed. And you could even call the one successful Walmart over on 72nd and Sheridan a 3rd one. Okay, so it's hard to fight against the market. A long time ago, I worked at a King Soopers in that very area, and there was a King Soopers and a Safeway there. And they were competed because that's what the market supported. The market changed. But it's an important discussion, and I don't think anyone's minimizing it or anything else like that. And on the survey end of it, I think some things like crime may have been overstated. Because that's what we hear on the news all the time. That I think that is an impact. We hear about car thefts and we're what? The first in the nation or something. And we hear about catalytic converters. And you know, we've touched a little bit on that. Maybe the best approach there is to remind people to lock their cars and take their keys. Stuff like that. So I think it could impact what the media broadcasts has an impact on the survey too.
To that point, I disagree wholeheartedly, and this is where I've been asking for a long, long time that it would be useful for this council to see shift reports, because I know that those are the things that actually show day to day that what officers are dealing with and some of the crime that I hear about that happens in the city. For example, I heard about a couple who had both their cars jacked the same night during the same meal. So we can't separate the reality of what's going on. Is that a Westminster only issue? No, it's not. But is that our responsibility as the city? Absolutely it is. So I don't think it's overstated. And that's just from what I hear within the community, just from residents who are victims of crime. So I don't think that's the case. To some of the other comments that I've heard, you made a very good point about what we've seen in that part of town as far as grocery stores and attempts by the city to try to augment the market to unfortunate failure, because I think that we would like to be able to see those services in each end of town. But if the market isn't going to sustain it, people aren't going to stay. One of my big concerns with they had the neighborhood Walmart that went in place after the Safeway closed. Didn't last. And I actually did personally, because I was on council when that failed, reached out to the Walmart reps to try to ask what the reasons were, why they closed it. Understanding retail market, I know if there's a lot of crime, a lot of shrink, those are the stores that get closed first because they're not sustainable to keep open because they're not making money. And if they're not making money, you know, businesses aren't running charities, unfortunately. That's not what they're doing. They're there to make money, so they can't pay the people to be there if they're not making any profit. But I will say there's a substantial list of things that you could look at that the city is doing. In my report earlier today, I talked about what the inclusivity board was interested in. Those are how we are spending those CDBG funds. So I don't think anybody on this council is saying that we shouldn't be spending those funds. I'm just saying that as far as priorities, we have certain priorities that are core services. I think the council is doing a good job holistically to look at ways that we can spend those dollars that come from the federal government to try to help the folks that need it the most.
Councilor Seymour?
Just to wrap up on my thoughts on the survey itself, because there's great opportunities for communication here. some of the ones that I saw too, you know, on the emergency services and emergency preparedness. I think if that survey would have come out the year before, that would have been very different. But I know for a fact in my line of business, people have Marshall Fire PTSD. And so they're concerned, especially on the western edge of our city, northern edge, they're concerned about, you know, what could happen. So I think that's a time and place one where we can, and I've seen too that we've, social media has been talking about our, you know, asking for people's input on that plan that we're putting together now. So I think that's positive communication. And then, you know, I saw too on the maintenance of streets too, snow removal kind of goes into that, and an annual push to educate the fact that, you know, we have to hit a certain level of snow in order to get into the neighborhoods, because that's always an issue on that. So, you know, if we can prepare people for that. And two, some of the thoughts on you know, there were some of them on there. You keep raising my property taxes. So just continue, you know, education on that part of where we get our resources from. And then, you know, quite a few comments on school districts too, and how there's a separation between us. I think it's just opportunities in the comments too to, you know, find a great, hey, you know, here's a did you know? And a lot of them are in the comments too that help clarify those for people, help them understand that part. So that's my last part from a survey.
I just want to say thank you. If this was a dartboard, this survey is in the bullseye for me. There was no surprises. All of the hundreds of people I talked to from all of those areas, that's what I hear. I mean, where those placements are, that's what you hear. No surprises. I said the same thing that you said during your talk with us. It's all about communication. For the police, we learned Saturday, on a given day, they can be down 40 people. We have 26 officers we need to hire. And then you've got people on vacation or sick or maternity and so 40 people a day we're minus. So it becomes what people need to hear, have a conversation about, or see something on Facebook about, or in the Westy Connect or whatever. They need to see this is fact. So now you have to prioritize people first. Fireworks, not so much. These other things, not so much. We've had 2 homicides going on in this city at once, and we ran out of officers. That's a fact. That's where we're at. So I think this report gives a year's worth of communication possibilities on everything that's listed in here. Where to find help for whatever the subject matter is. Code enforcement. What does that mean? How can you share some things? I mean, if you've got a vacant lot next to you, nobody's mowing the weeds or whatnot. I'm going to my community garden. There's weeds this high. That field needs to be mowed. The icky thorn thistles are blooming and going to be sharing their seeds everywhere. That needs to be cut down. But it's communication. Communication is key now that we know and verified what the pieces in this city needs some clarification, needs some understanding for people, because folks, we can't fix for everybody. People need to take responsibility. And we've said that all along. If there's something that's wrong, tell us. We can't fix it if it's not reported. And don't have somebody else report for you. There is a million ways to get a hold of city manager, this council directly. The departments have their emails you can get to directly. So you're right on. I appreciate this. And you heard some great discussion, but communication is our key to helping people understand what their responsibility is, what the truth about what some of our departments are dealing with. And when it comes to budget, I hope some of those departments tell us, I could name a couple that are going to tell us probably if we need them to perform to what this survey says, we're probably going to need some new heads on the in their area so they have help. Our staff can't be stressed. We've had COVID. We need people that have life balance. We do need people that take vacation. And it's time for residents to take responsibility. It's time for us to put the right pieces into a budget to make it all happen. Thank you so much for all your work. Anything else for tonight? All right, we're out of here.
Come on.